This morning I want us to begin a brand new series just for the next 3 weeks called Some Assembly Required. Really what it deals with is how do you piece together a great family. And this morning what I want to argue is the way you piece together a great family is you become a complete person. Like that's the very first step, is become a complete person. So I ran across an interview with Tom Brady. Tom Brady at this point is 2005, was 27 years old. It was amazing all the stuff that Tom Brady had already accomplished. He held the NFL record for most touchdown passes. By age 27, he'd already been voted the NFL MVP. He had 3 Super Bowl rings already. So 60 Minutes sat down with Tom Brady to interview him. And you would think when you sit down with a guy who is that successful, you'd find somebody who really feels fulfilled as a person. But he strangely said something completely different.
Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life is me. I thank God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27, and what else is there for me?
What's the answer?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew.
There's got to be more. The reason I wanted to show you that clip is because it's that mentality, that emptiness that I think affects our relationships. So this morning I want to begin this series, Some Assembly Required. How is it you piece together a great family? I think it begins by being a complete person. So growing up, particularly when when I was single, I would hear people say things to me like, don't concentrate on finding Mrs. Right, concentrate on finding Mr. Sorry, no, concentrate on being Mr. Right, excuse me. Don't concentrate, let me say that again. Don't concentrate on finding Mrs. Right, concentrate on being Mr. Right. I remember somebody told me one time that a great marriage is not 50% person, 50% person becoming 100% person, but it's 100% person and 100% person becoming 200% person. I read a book with one of my daughters on dating, 10 Commandments of Dating. Commandment number 1 is thou shalt get a life. Thou shalt get a life. And all those things are really saying the same thing. If you're standing at the altar about to say I do, and with Tom Brady, you're feeling like, man, there must be something more. Or worse, from there, you're looking at this person you're about to marry and saying, I believe they're going to finally fill this void in my life. They're going to finally complete me. Then what I understand those people saying is you're setting yourself up for failure. Because it's not another person that's going to fill that void. What is required is for you to become a complete person. 100% person, 100% person, becoming 200%. So how is it that you become a complete, fulfilled, full of purpose, content person who is flourishing? How is it you become a complete person? This is what I believe. The more I belong to Christ, the more I become complete. The more I belong to Christ, the more I become complete. Would you say that with me? The more I belong to Christ, the more I become complete. Let me just unpack that a little bit for you. I'm not talking about perfect completeness in this life. Paul said, here we behold in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. It's on that day that we stand before Jesus that we will be complete, perfectly complete before Him. But that doesn't mean we don't make progress in this life towards that completeness, towards that life, towards that fulfillment, towards that sense of meaning. So I believe that the more, so movement, the more I become like Christ, the more complete I become as a person. And from that completeness, then I can experience the kind of marriage, the kind of family that God has designed me to experience. The more I belong to Christ, the more I become complete. So that's what Jesus taught in Luke chapter 9. In Luke chapter 9, if you have your Bibles, I would encourage you to turn there. Luke chapter 9. The chapter, the context of it is, it's kind of this great day to be a follower of Christ. It's a great day to be a follower of Christ. I mean, the disciples, when the chapter opened, were saying it's a great day for ministry. I mean, Jesus had just sent them out. They'd come back. They preached the good news. Multitudes of people were healed. It was a great day for ministry. I mean, it's a great day for teaching. Literally, thousands of people were flocking to listen to Jesus teach. It's a great day for ministry. It's a great day for teaching. It's a great day for eating. Jesus had just fed 5,000 men plus their wives and children. It's a great day for eating. I mean, it's a great day. And it's as if the crowd and the disciples could begin to get this idea that life is found in success and in size. You know, great ministry, great food, great teaching. Life is found in success and size. And Jesus wants to stay far away from that. Not that those things are bad, but that's not where life is found. And so in verse 23, he gets right to the point. And he says this: if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me will find it. For what does it profit a person if they gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their soul? There, Jesus is teaching, I think, a number of things that are necessary in order to find completeness as a person. 3 in particular. In that passage, I read Jesus saying that becoming a complete person requires, 1, the right goal. The right goal. And that said, I must not settle for anything else. I must go after life. Verse 25. He said, what does it profit a person if they gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their soul? Gain the whole world. What would that be like if you gained the whole world? Like, consider if you gained all the possessions in the world. In 2015, it was estimated that the global net worth was $250 trillion. $250 trillion. Imagine if you got it all. I mean, nobody else had anything, and you had $250 trillion. You had all the possessions in the world. And imagine if you had not only all the possessions in the world, but you had all the prestige in the world. Like when you walk into Prosper's new stadium on Friday night, there's a hush that falls over the crowd as people slowly stand on their feet and applaud, welcome you to the game. Because you have all the prestige, you have all the possessions. And imagine if you had also all the power. Like, there's not a decision made in the entire world before you are consulted. You got the power. You got the prestige. You got all the possessions. Can you imagine? Jesus says, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world? What Jesus is saying is, I mean, you can get all that, and that's not necessarily bad. But what he says is, it's not enough. It's because to gain all that is to miss what is most important. What does it profit a man if he gains all that and yet loses or forfeits his very self, his soul, his life? What is that? Jesus described it this way in John chapter 4. Remember the woman at the well? He says, but whoever drinks from the water that I give him, that water will become in him this spring that wells up to eternal life. In John chapter 7, Jesus said, if any man is thirsty, let him come to me and drink, and from his innermost being will gush forth rivers of life-giving water. John 10, he said, the thief comes to steal, murder, and destroy, but I came that they might have life and might have it more abundantly. The life Jesus is offering you, you can call it meaning, you can call it purpose, you can call it contentment, you can call it human flourishing, you can call it abundant life or abundant joy, whatever you call it. Jesus says that's what you've got to go after. Don't settle for riches. Don't settle for power or prestige, because it'll never satisfy. Instead, Jesus says, go after life. Those that are complete as a person have the right goal, and that's that they aim at life. Do you know the name Merle Haggard? Thank you, all three of you. Yeah. So first hour I asked that. It's like everybody, oh yeah, Merle Haggard. Nobody this hour knows who he is, or Stuart does. So Merle Haggard died in 2016. He was a big-time country music guy. Guy had 38 albums on the Billboard Country Music's top 10 list. 38 albums. He had 38 songs that were #1 hits. Merle Haggard. So the guy had power, he had prestige, he had popularity, and yet towards the end of his life, Merle Haggard says this, there is this restlessness in my soul that I've never conquered, not with motion, all these concerts moving around, not with marriages. He was married like 6 times, or with any kind of meaning. It's still there, and it will be till the day I die. What is it that pieces together a great family? It begins with this sense of life or completeness that a person has. When they bring that to a relationship, then that relationship has a tendency to flourish. And what I hear Jesus saying in verse 25 is, don't acquiesce to emptiness like Merle Haggard did. Don't just say, well, I give up because it's going to be with me till the day I die. Instead, make that your goal. I'm going to go after full, explosive life. You got to have the right goal, but Jesus says also becoming a complete person requires the right Lord. You got to have the right goal. I'm going after life and meaning and purpose and human flourishing. And you got to have the right Lord. Verse 24, he says, for whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me will save it. Verse 24 is talking about saving your life. In the context of the passage, what he's talking about is keeping this sense of meaning or purpose from being extinguished. Instead of doing what's necessary to realize human flourishing. How is it that you do that? He says you got 2 choices. You can listen to one of 2 voices. First voice you can listen to is your own. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Saving your life is the person who says, I'm going to rule myself. I'm going to listen to my own voice. I'm going to follow my heart. I'm going to do what I want. It's like this person in Luke chapter 12. Jesus tells this parable of a guy that had an incredible harvest. And so notice how he speaks. So he said, well, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I will store all my grain and my goods. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and be married. The point is that guy was saying to himself. He was completely self-ruled. And that's what Jesus says, it means when he says whoever saves his life. They're looking to themselves, self-protection, self-rule. Jesus says the result of that is you're going to lose it. You will never find life by listening to your own heart. But you have a second choice. You listen to yourself, or you can listen to Jesus. Jesus says, but whoever loses his life for me, that person will save it. In other words, if a person acquiesces or abdicates the throne of their own heart, if a person decides to snuff out the flame of self-rulership, if a person will decide to bow their knee to Jesus, having left the throne of their heart and surrender their heart to him, Jesus says it's that person that will find the life that they long for. In my backyard on the patio, I have a number of potted plants. I've got key limes. I've got Myers lemons pot. I've got blueberries, 3 pots of blueberries. I've got mint. I've got flowers. So could you imagine, like it's 101 degrees these days. Imagine I go out on the back patio and those pots, those plants stage a revolt. I don't know what that look like, but they hold up a sign, no more. We don't want your fertilizer. We don't want your water. We're going to do it ourselves. And I say, okay, 101 degree temperatures. What do you think those plants are going to look like about a week from now? They're going to be dry and dead. They ain't going to be green. They're going to be brown. Life is not going to be pretty. But imagine if instead those plants, like they do, allowed me to rule them. So I go to the back patio because I am the all-knowing gardener. I give them the right amount of fertilizer. I give them the right amount of water. Take care of insects. I take care of them. Consequently, those plants are green and robust and fruitful and bright. Jesus is saying the same thing. If you decide to rule your own life, you're like a plant on my back patio that says, we don't want your water. You can keep your fertilizer. I'm going to do it myself. Jesus says, you do that, you're going to end up brown and dead and dry. That's going to be your life. But if instead you will surrender yourself to me, your life will be new and green and growing and beautiful. It's kind of like in everybody's heart, there's this boardroom. You know, it's this table, chairs around this table. There's a pitcher of ice water in the middle of the table, a whiteboard with markers. In everybody's heart, there's this boardroom. And there are certain board members that sit around that boardroom table. You got the sexual self. You've got the recreational self sitting around that table. You got the work self. You got your social self sitting around the table. You got your work self. All these selves sitting around the table. And all these selves are trying to make decisions for you. They're constantly arguing and differing with each other. They're upset at each other. And consequently, your life is agitated and empty. And you feel dead and lifeless. That's what's going on at a boardroom table. Here's the mistake that most Christians make. They ask Christ to be their Savior and forgive all their sins. And then it's like they put their arm around Jesus and open the door to the boardroom and escort him in and say, Jesus, here are all my selves. Why don't you take a seat? So Jesus sits down with all these other selves, and it doesn't help things. In fact, your life just becomes more confusing. And that's never what Jesus asked for. Jesus never asked to be ushered into your boardroom and take a seat with all the other selves. What Jesus said is, I want to walk in that room and I want to turn over the table and I want to drive every other self out. I want you to hand me the keys to your boardroom. I want you to bow the knee and say, Jesus, my life is yours. You control me. And according to verse 24, it's when you and I do that that we really begin to flourish. It's then that we come alive. But there's a third thing that's required. What does it look like to yield to Jesus? It requires the right goal. It requires the right Lord. But then Jesus said it also requires the right approach. What does it mean to surrender to him? That's verse 23. When he says, if anyone wants to come after me, if anyone wants to follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Those three commands are really saying the same thing. You must deny yourself. That Greek word translated deny is found in Titus chapter 2 and verse 12. But Paul says, the grace of God has appeared to all men, teaching us to say no to ungodliness and worldly desires. Those two words, to say no, is the same Greek word deny. And Jesus says, what you got to do first is you got to say no to yourself. You got to, when your heart tells you to do something that's contrary to the will of God, when your flesh leads you in a different direction, for Jesus to be your Lord means that you say no to those things. You got to deny yourself. He says you got to take up your cross daily. All his listeners would automatically know what he meant when he said you got to take up your cross. They were in Israel living under Roman rule. Romans, when they tried someone, convicted them, and sentenced them to death, before they killed them on a cross, they would force them to carry the beam of the cross through streets. They did that to deter crime. When you saw someone carrying the beam of the cross, when you saw someone carrying their cross, you knew they were a dead man. And that's what Jesus means. He says, take up your cross. Just like deny yourself is to say no to yourself. To pick up your cross means to die to yourself. I'm not going to listen to myself anymore. Well, then who do you listen to? Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. It means stop listening to myself, and I'm going to start listening to Jesus. And he says it's when you do that, that is when you find life. I read a horrible story this week. A doctor gave birth to conjoined twins. He went to the parents and he said, surgery is necessary immediately in order to keep from losing both babies. And so the parents gave their permission for surgery. The doctor knew they didn't understand what he was asking. And so he decided to get really plain. He said, y'all need to understand that I can save one, but I can't save the other. I can save either, but I can't save both. And you need to decide which one will live and which one will die. In a sense, that's what's going on in Luke chapter 9. Jesus is saying, you can serve one, but you can't serve the other. You can serve either, but you can't serve both. Either you live for yourself and you say no to me, or you say yes to me and no to yourself. And if you will say no to yourself, yes to me, it is then that you will have incredible life. So here again, what I'm saying, we all want to piece together great families. Where does that begin? It begins with 100% person, 100% person becoming 200% person. Well, how is it you become 100% person? What I'm saying is the more you belong to Christ, the more you become complete. So I want you to think for just a second. How's your family? Is your family a place where there's joy, where there's growth and health, or is your family in decay? If your family is in decay, could it be because you're not becoming complete? And could it be that the reason you're not becoming complete is because you're not belonging more and more to Christ? Is it possible that your family is in disarray because you're ruling your own life instead of allowing Jesus to take control. Well, if you want Jesus to take control, what is it that you do? What do you specifically do in order to become a complete person? Let me just give you a couple things and we're done. The first is to become a complete person, you got to make a personal choice. And really what I mean by that is two things. One, you got to make a choice about your forgiveness. And secondly, you got to make a choice about control, about forgiveness and control. You got to make this one about forgiveness before you can make the decision about control second. For forgiveness, because of my sin, I'm separated from God. Consequently, I can't have a relationship with him. But the good news is he sent Christ to die on the cross. There he paid for my sin and proved it was true by raising from the dead. When I believe in him as Savior, all my sin is forgiven, and I am reconciled with God, which means now I can have a relationship with him, which leads to the second decision. Then I've got to decide who's going to run my life. Am I going to continue to try to do things my way and end up miserable and empty? Or am I going to choose to bow my knee and allow Christ to rule my life? It begins by making a personal choice. Secondly, it'd be nice if once you made that choice, everything was over. But it's a choice that you got to make on a daily basis, which is why Jesus said, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. I mean, it'd be nice to say, here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for your courts above, and doom, it was done. But that's just not reality. I've got to continue to remind myself on a regular basis that I belong to him. I am not my own. Lord, I belong to you. And I've got to do that over and over again, which leads to a third thing, is you got to spend regular time with God. It ain't going to happen if you don't spend regular time with God. For me, that means getting up in the morning, opening my Bible, spending some time in his word where I hear his voice, and in that moment being reminded that I am not my own. I've been bought with a price. Therefore, I will glorify God in my body. And as I do so, then I experience great life. And then 4, you're going to need a group. I forget. I go astray. I need to be inspired, which is why I've got to be a part of a small group. It's a small group of people that share testimonies about the greatness of God, who encourage me to continue to follow Christ so that I can be the man that I long to be. I got to be a part of a small group, and so to you. So some of you are familiar with the game poker. Probably not anybody here. So it was so funny. I said that first hour, they kind of chuckled, and then in a minute I asked a question, and they all knew the answer. And so in poker, you know that they're playing, and then that dramatic moment comes when one of the players gathers together all his chips, pushes them into the center of the table, and he says, "I am." Boy, y'all are just terrible. I am all in. I am all in, which is what Jesus is calling us to do here. Jesus is calling us to be all in. And when we get to the place where by faith we are all in, that's when we find the life that we need to breathe completeness into our families. Would you pray with me?